This is Kick-Ass News. I'm Ben Mathis. Support for today's show comes from the Weather Channel, television's most trusted source for severe weather coverage. Go beyond maps and apps and dive into the science and stories behind the storm, because understanding our atmosphere is the best way to prepare for severe weather. Every season, every storm, every time you watch, trust the Weather Channel. And now, enjoy the show.
Here comes McEnroe and nets a forehand and now goes over toward the photographers, and he's going to meet them eyeball to eyeball. And the crowd reacts. He shouted something into the earphones of a courtside reporter.
That moment in the third set of the men's final at the 1984 French Open still haunts tennis great John McEnroe. To this very day, every time he's in Paris, he's plagued by a recurring nightmare about that incident 3 decades ago when he lost his cool at a TV cameraman and the crowd in the stands turned on him, shaking his mental game and eventually costing him the match. Though he would go on to win Wimbledon and the U.S. Open in what was his best year on the tour, the French Open was his bitterest defeat and the one that robbed him of winning all 3 Grand Slam tournaments. He talks about it in his new book titled But Seriously. And on this opening day of Wimbledon, McEnroe comes on the show to discuss that infamous match, his legendary temper, his celebrated career on the court, and his long view of life and of the game he's played since he was 9 years old. Another 9 years later, an 18-year-old John McEnroe burst onto the tennis scene, and he surprised everyone by becoming the youngest man to reach Wimbledon's men's semifinals. He went on to win 7 Grand Slam championships, including 4 U.S. Opens and 3 Wimbledon championships, earning fame for his impressive tennis skills, his volatile persona on court, and his legendary rivalry with Bjorn Borg. McEnroe contributed to 5 Davis Cup titles for the U.S. and later served as team captain. He became the top-ranked singles player in the world in 1980 and continued to finish at #1 for 4 straight years in a row from 1981 to 1984. In addition to his 7 Grand Slam singles titles, he won 9 Grand Slam men's doubles titles and 1 Grand Slam mixed doubles title. These days, John McEnroe continues to play tennis regularly on the ATP Champions Tour. He has a highly successful career as a sports commentator for both ESPN and the BBC at Wimbledon, as well as ESPN at the US Open and NBC and Eurosport at the French Open. He also founded the John McEnroe Tennis Academy on Randall's Island, where he continues to play an active role in getting underprivileged kids interested in the sport. Beyond his tennis career, he's appeared in films like Mr. Deeds and Anger Management alongside Adam Sandler, and television shows like Saturday Night Live, 30 Rock, and Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's a musician, an art collector with his own art gallery, and the author of the best-selling memoir You Can't Be Serious and his new sequel to it titled But Seriously. Today he'll talk about some of his famous arguments with tennis umpires and linesmen and how his temper actually helped his game in his younger years, but he says held him back later in his career. He'll talk about winning his first Grand Slam, his life after sports, and that recurring nightmare about his 1984 match with Yvonne Lendl. He'll handicap this year's Wimbledon finals, give his characteristically frank take on the state of the game, and a few things he'd like to do away with in tennis. Plus, he'll even give me a few tips on how to improve my serve. Coming up with tennis great John McEnroe in just a moment. Today I'm talking with tennis great John McEnroe. He's written a new book called But Seriously? Mac, thanks for joining me.
Good to be here.
I got to tell you what a great honor this is for me. You know, tennis was a big part of our family when I was growing up. My brother played competitively. I was never that good, but my dad was a big tennis nut. In fact, I think the last year that you played in the main tour in '92, I was at Wimbledon and watched you play Agassi in the semifinals.
I wish you had seen one of the earlier matches.
I do too.
And not that one.
You know, I remember my brother was rooting for Agassi, and I was there, and I was just thinking, God, I just want to see Mac get into it with the umpire. That was the highlight with me.
Well,
and
nothing's changed, apparently. Now, the only difference is they pay me extra for it, apparently, on the Champions Tour. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it became counterproductive in my later years, and I didn't play better, which is really what matters. I mean, if you sort of go crazy a little bit and you're able to maintain your focus, for the most part, I was able to in the early years. But as I got older, had kids, slightly different perspective, it seems sort of weak, and it was hurting me, even though I couldn't help myself from doing it anyway.
I think you say that when you were younger, it actually helped you. How does that work? I would think that would be kind of counterintuitive.
Well, I guess a lot of the players that I played against seemed to not like it a whole lot. So from that standpoint alone, that would help if it throws them. But for me personally, I felt like it gave me that sort of boost of adrenaline and some energy and some will that I maybe hadn't found yet.
Yeah.
Just sort of get so into it that you get semi-crazed.
Now, does it bother you that that's what people want to see now, and that's what you're known for as much as your skills as a tennis player, maybe even more?
Well, probably I wouldn't be speaking with you, because the first book I put out was You Cannot Be Serious, which obviously is my most famous phrase. And then This Is But Seriously, which obviously is a takeoff from that.
Yeah.
And so I have to, part of the reason I wrote this book was really to sort of give people the idea that hopefully I have a better perspective and able to sort of learn from things that had happened in the past and look at the glass half full as opposed to half empty. I mean, that's sort of the big lesson for me. I'm not trying to necessarily impart lessons on individuals that choose to read this, but at the same time, I think it's important to make the effort. I mean, one of the things that I believe is that you have to train, go out and work out to keep yourself physically fit. It made me feel better as a human being when I get a good workout in. I haven't worked out yet today, so I feel a little bit like I'm not quite right. But I also think it's important that you work at trying to sort of look at things more positively. I mean, you need that type of effort. You can't just assume that your mind's going to sort of, as you get older, suddenly say, you know something? God, I've been pretty damn lucky, which is true. But unfortunately, the human mind seems to sort of go to the things that you haven't done, that you didn't accomplish, that are bugging you now, and that why didn't I do this better? And it happens still to me every day. So, and I've been pretty lucky. So I can imagine that it's even worse for other people.
You know, along those lines, you open the book by talking about this recurring nightmare that you've had every time that you're in Paris. What is that? Why is that nagging?
Well, the one event that I think would have elevated me to even greater heights in terms of how people viewed me in the history books was the French Open, which, unlike other sports, we play on different surfaces under different conditions, so that if you're able to win on all of them, there's just that much more of a satisfaction that you can look at yourself with even more pride. And I felt like I hadn't really addressed trying to be the best on that surface until the mid-'80s, and I felt like, okay, I sort of got that in order to show that I was the best of the best, that I needed to win on that surface. And I came within 5 points. And for a variety of reasons, even that match and before and after, I never won that tournament. And so fortunately, I was able to sort of get if you want to call it a second career, and commentating and being involved in the sport still. So I go back every year because to me, the most fun is covering the big major events. So every time I go back there, even though Paris is arguably the most beautiful city in the world, I can't help. I wish I could, but it seems to crop up. I mean, friends seem to annoyingly bring it up too often. You see it on TV or hear about it or it's talked about. It's hard to sort of avoid it. And then it's just sort of having to accept it. And it really is a microcosm of, in a way, of life, the things that perhaps you should have done differently and didn't. But you got to learn how to at least deal with them and accept it and move on. And so that's it. Since it did happen and does happen there, when I go there every year, usually at least once, I felt like it was sort of an interesting way to start the book, because it's sort of what we're faced with all the time in life anyway.
Yeah, and the dream is from the 1984 match that you had with the Von Lindell. I wonder, when you have the dream every year, does it ever have a different ending, or does it ever vary?
It varies, but it always, unfortunately, I always wake up at some point.
Yeah.
And then I realize I've lost, and it's the same damn nightmare.
Do you think that there's some deeper meaning or lesson to that, or is it just that this traumatizing experience has been seared in your brain all these years?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure the answer. There's nothing you can change. So that part is over. You can learn from sort of some life lessons, perhaps, and learn so that the next time something remotely similar happens, that maybe you handle it differently. And it doesn't mean I haven't made a ton of mistakes since then. I have. And hopefully I've sort of opened my mind to more easily try to learn from them. And that's the key. I wasn't part of what made me good was I was, I believed in myself, and I believed in what win, lose, or draw, even if I was acting like an ass sometimes, that I thought that was the way to go. And while I listened to people, I wasn't sort of taking it in a whole lot. And so sometimes you can get some great advice that you blow off and you sort of wish you hadn't. Other times you get too much advice. So this is all part of life, and trying to figure out each individual decision you make. I mean, it's just, I wish it was easier, because I don't think ultimately this is sort of a crazy world we live in, and yet it's a beautiful world. And so it seems like, to me, at this point in my life, and having gone what I've gone through and experienced what I have, that I sort of owe it to people to sort of make the effort, really concerted effort, to say, hey, I've been pretty lucky.
Now, I have to ask, did you ever win an argument with an umpire in your whole career?
I don't believe I've ever won one.
So doesn't it
I'm like
seem like
0 for 145.
So doesn't it seem like an exercise in futility looking back, or how do you look at it?
There was definitely, I took a course in Stanford. It was an economics course, and one of the things we studied was law of diminishing returns. And this was definitely became less and less productive as time went on, because I actually believed the first 50 or 100 that I was actually going to win an argument. And then I suddenly thought to myself, run as fast as you can and run headfirst into a brick wall and see how that feels. And after a while, you realize, something that doesn't feel so good. The irony was that I probably got, 50 times I was fined, different occasions, somewhere in that crazy amount of times. And in my day, you could almost time it to where if you hit over a certain number, you would get automatic suspension. And you're playing virtually every week. So in a way, you had to make you did make your own schedule, but sometimes if you really felt like burnt out, you'd really make your own schedule, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I had said something to an umpire that had set me over the $7,500 threshold that was going to give me like a 3-week break, which I felt like I desperately needed. And the night before the final, I was in Sydney, Australia. My father, calls me, and he says, he was managing me at the time, and he said, you won't believe this, but we had appealed a fine back in August in Cincinnati, and you won the appeal.
Oh, really?
The only one I ever won.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God,
good.
why did I have to win it this time? So I had to make sure I went out in the next round and got, fined again.
Well, I know that you must get this question all the time, but how different do you think the game might have been for you if the challenge system had existed around the time when you were on the tour?
I would have been 20% better player and 40% more boring.
Okay, and
less
know what
interesting.
They pay to see, huh?
Well, no, I didn't know that
Yeah.
at the time. That was the irony. I couldn't believe that people took such an interest in it. But you said you were looking back, so I've had a little perspective chance to think about this. And as you can imagine, sometimes people ask me that type of question. What have you been like with the challenge system? Nastasio always said, "We'll figure something out. Well, we'll go turn it some other place." I was like, "Yeah, probably." So there's ways. I've got the solution that would take it back to that, which would be because now they have the challenge system. The players would call their own lines. Okay. And you'll get like the trash talking and the distrust and the hatred and then, thinking you're getting cheated by the opponent. But you have the challenge system. Okay. And then it would bring the crowd much more involved as well. Because to me, tennis needs a jolt. Yeah. Even though we have these tremendous players, the greatest of all time, and Federer and Nadal, for example, and Djokovic is not that far behind. It doesn't seem like it's, certainly in the States, not talked about nearly as much or in the same way that it was back. I mean, I admit I'm biased, but it was sort of the heyday of tennis. And when I came in, all these characters and personalities, and I thought, man, this is incredible. Because at first I thought tennis was sort of, I didn't really want to be in that sort of sissy game when I grew up in the country club sport. And they want us to act a certain way, and you got to wear your long pants like Bill Tilden or whatever. And you're like, that's not what I want to do. My goal was to be treated the same way as other athletes. I could imagine that if you're on the hockey rink or you're in the middle of Soldier Field in Chicago, where some of my buddies that I went to college with, I got to know, played, they're not saying, "Hello, how are you?" when they come out of the huddle and they're about ready to. And yet in tennis, oh my God, if we said a bad word or yelled at the umpires, this is completely outrageous. I remember in the early 80s, there was, I believe it was a Miami Herald. And they did a survey of like who the most hated villains were in the history of the world. And it was like Hitler 1, Attila the Hun 2, John McEnroe 3, Son of Sam. It was like, what the hell? I think perspective's getting a little warped here. Mussolini 5. I'm like, I'm 3, and these oh my God. So that was sort of got me thinking, man, they really don't get it.
Are you jealous of what players can get away with now?
I don't think they get away with that much, actually. No, I think we got away with way more.
Oh, really? You think so?
Oh, yeah. I'd like to throw them under the bus, but the truth is, I mean, you hear a lot of curse words when Murray plays, for example. And they used to go back and listen to the tapes. I'm like, wait a second. I mean, this guy's the British are all into sort of, act a certain way, and they, God forbid, you'd curse at the Wimbledon. and you do have to be more careful there. But admittedly, I went off on a linesman or something, but you couldn't hear it. Yeah. It was like sort of way far away from the umpire, and that was sort of the point in a way, until they went back and there's in the tape like, oh my God. And they don't do that. It's amazing. Like for some reason, it does a little annoying that the mics aren't right there. They were when they used to have a guy, these, what do they call those guys that have this stick? Boom mics right at net. And they, as soon as I go to the umpire, I could see it right in my face. I was like, these son of a bitches. Just get it away from me. Now they don't seem to be far away at all. But now, generally, I think these guys are, I got to say, even in my time, I think that part of the reason why, again, that I'm sitting here talking to you about this book is that people relate to me as a human being a lot more than they relate to these other guys, because tennis is unbelievably frustrating. Yeah. And it's hard to just sort of stand there and take it all. Forget the fact that how difficult it is to execute on a tennis court, the shots, and do what you want to do. But then if things start going haywire and wrong, and then some guy screws you, and I first being at Wimbledon, some guy in the back would be asleep, one of the linesmen, and be like, hey, he might keep him asleep. He might be better that way.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the dream, your infamous nightmare, that you were being thrown off in that match by what was it, like the cameraman had someone speaking into his earpiece and the volume was up so loud that you could hear it while you were playing on the court, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And now on the other side as a commentator, for example, when the recent French Open women's final was extremely one-sided in the beginning for the favorite. And so it's 6-4-3 love, break points. The producer's already starting to say, oh, God, we got to fill. We got to come up. What are we going to do? Because it's like a 4-hour show and we're an hour into the show. Well, somehow that person ended up turning it around and winning the match. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of what was happening in that particular match with Lendl. It was probably the producer talking to the cameraman, look, when the match ends and when McEnroe wins, which to me is sort of that jinxie type of thing. I shouldn't have, obviously. I reacted pitifully and gave the crowd reason to start rooting against me. Mm-hmm. And also it probably gave my opponent, the infamous Ivan Lendl, a reason to think, hey, maybe he's not quite as sure of himself as he appears to be when he won the first set, which I should have been, having won the first set 6-3 and the second 6-2 or something like that. And that I should have just cruised to victory. Instead, I sort of showed a chink in the armor. So that's something it's difficult to live with. I did wear my emotions on my sleeve generally, and for the most part, I was able to handle that. But this particular case was a brutal mistake.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back to talk more with tennis great John McEnroe when we come back in just a minute. HelloFresh is on a mission to save home cooking. HelloFresh is the meal kit delivery service that makes cooking more fun so you can focus on the whole experience, not just the final plate. Each week, HelloFresh creates new delicious recipes with step-by-step instructions designed to take around 30 minutes for everyone from novices to seasoned home cooks short on time. They source the freshest ingredients measured to the exact quantities needed so there's no food waste, and they even employ 2 full-time registered dietitians on staff who review each recipe to ensure it's nutritionally balanced. I've started making meals from HelloFresh, and let me tell you, the ingredients always arrive fresh in an insulated, recyclable box. Everything comes perfectly portioned out, and the recipes are quick and easy to follow, so even an amateur like me can put together a great home-cooked meal in no time. And most importantly, HelloFresh's meals taste great. So great, in fact, that when Mother's Day rolled around this year, I ordered HelloFresh for my mom, and now she's hooked as well. HelloFresh is now offering light summer meals and has just introduced breakfast options. Delicious ingredients you'll love to eat, simple recipes you'll live to cook. So get cooking and do it for less than $10 a meal. For $30 off your first week of deliveries, visit HelloFresh.com and enter KICK30 when you subscribe. Again, that's HelloFresh.com and enter KICK30. And now, back to the podcast. Well, you call him the infamous Ivan Lendl. What is it that even to this day seems to rub you the wrong way about that guy?
Pretty much everything.
Okay.
No, but I have to say I do respect what he brought in terms of work ethic and his dedication and his ability to learn from mistakes. Because we battled in the juniors. We knew I played him in the French Open juniors, so it's not as if we didn't know each other. And he's like Ivan Drago, in Rocky IV. He's like a machine. He became one, which you got to give him credit for. Yeah. And he came from a totally different circumstance in his life. His mother was a Czech player. Czechs players have a history of success in sports, not just tennis, but other sports, because it was a way out. And so I'm sure there was a hunger, obviously, that I didn't have. I had to find in a different way. I grew up in Douglas and Queens in a upper middle class environment and joined a country club. Everything that seemed lame about sort of our sport, but it turned out to be a great sport. And I ran into a lot of great people. And I obviously, if you believe, which I do in a way, that sort of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, where it's meant to be for whatever reason, someone wanted me to play tennis.
Yeah.
I can't figure out why that was, but at 8.5, when my parents moved to a different location in Douglaston, it was a block away from the tennis court. I'd still go down to the field where we play baseball and football and basketball. But after that was done, I would go to the court and hit against the wall or something. And then some guy was there and said, hey, you should send him to this other place. And then that's how that happened. And then I met guys that I didn't know who the hell they were, but they turned out to be, in a way, legendary and influential people to me, and sort of in our sport had a lot of success. And it was just one thing led to another, until I get to the Wimbledon. The first time in the juniors, I'm sent there, and 40 years ago now. Next thing I know, I'm in the semis of Wimbledon. I mean, I'm making a long story short, but I walked into I remember the hotel, and they had the odds because they're big on gambling there. And it was, Borg was like 2-1, Connors 4 to 5-1, Gerolaitis 25-1, McEnroe 250-1. I said, God, they think I have that good a chance. And just to have my name with those three guys was literally like a dream come true. I couldn't even have thought it could happen that fast. And then to want to sort of get that respect was huge, and to eventually get it.
Yeah, you say that winning your first Grand Slam tournament is always a big game changer, both in terms of the player's own head and in how people treat you. What was that like for you?
Well, mine was a little weird because I played Vitas Gerolaitis, my late great friend, and I looked up to him in the juniors. I met him when he was 16 and I was 12. They don't have, 16-year-old guys who got a lot of charisma and girls sort of falling on them, or by 18, I was 14. They're not hanging around with 14-year-olds. So I aspired to be like him in a way. I mean, the guy, they rolled out the red carpet when he went to Studio 54, for example. You're like, this is amazing. I couldn't get in. I'd beg to get. I'm like, I'm John McEnroe. I'm number 6 in the world in tennis. And they'd be like, what? What does that mean? So it gave me this sort of hunger, but also respect for what he did. So in a way, it wasn't quite what it was what it could have been had I beaten, say, Connors or Borg, because it was against Vitas, who we had in a way, he had taken me under his wing a little. I tell the story that even when I beat him that day for the first Grand Slam, which obviously is amazing. I'm not saying it's not an amazing feeling, but it can be more amazing sort of depending on other circumstances. He said to me, what are you doing later? And I thought, I'm doing whatever he's doing, because whatever he's doing is going to be a whole lot better than what I'm doing. I can promise you that. So that's not easy to do, though. I mean, if you're 24, you've just lost the U.S. Open final. We grew up, both of us, about 20 minutes from the facility. So it never happened before, and I hope it happens, because I'm at this John McEnroe Tennis Academy in Randall's Island. So I like to sit here and come back on your show in 10 years and say, hey, I got 2 guys that are in the finals of the U.S. Open. But the odds of it happening are slim and none. And yet when that happened, they were sort of booing us, and because they wanted Borg Connors. Right. It was like if Golden State and Cleveland had not played, and the 2 other teams had played, like whoever they beat, Boston. I mean, Boston has a name, but let's just, you know what I'm saying. Or like Boston, San Antonio. I don't know about that. That's not the final we won. They were sort of pissed that they had to put up. And I'm thinking, we're 2 kids from Queens, for God's sakes.
Why don't we have more Americans at the top of the game these days?
I thought we only had 30 minutes for this show. I'll try to say it in 15 to 30 seconds, which is money. Yeah. The cost of it is even higher. The 1%. I mean, if you're lucky, it's 1%. The athleticism that it requires, because of the speed of the game, the technology is so much faster that you need to be more athletic. Whereas before, tennis players could beat athletes. I mean, you want to be both. Borg was the fastest guy I ever saw on a tennis court. And there were some great athletes. Vitas was a great athlete, others. But it's even more athletic now. And they're rangier, bigger guys. Yeah. So now athletes beat tennis players because it's so quick that the tennis players can't even do their thing. There's not as much strategy. Guys are out there swinging for the fences. And so because of that, and because of the fact that the cost – and the cool factor, I mean, let's face it, you got to have some of that for kids who want to play, especially kids in inner cities that, they're not going to want to go and say, oh, you playing that, sissy game? Forget it. I'm going to go play, football, basketball. Our best athletes, I played soccer in high school, which I believe helped my tennis because it's, sprinting, stopping, the movement of basketball is helpful. But if you take the size of a tennis court these days, especially in a New York City, where real estate is at a total premium, they'll stick 20 kids out there, kick a ball. They pretend they know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's easier than when you have to really teach a kid tennis, which is a very difficult sport to master and learn.
Yeah.
I mean, even for the best of the best. That all those things together, the coaching and the nurturing that's required, and the way they're going about it to me is a mistake too, because they're taking too many kids at like 10 years old. They're saying, you can't play anything but tennis now. You must focus exclusively on tennis. No, I don't think so. I think that's absolutely dead wrong, because I think the other sports you learn to, I mean, tennis, you're out there by yourself a lot, which is difficult. So it's important to have, say, teammates and sort of a release, blow off some steam. Build character. Maybe you'll lose it. You'll build some character losing in tennis, but you'll also have other people to sort of put your head on someone's shoulders in other sports, which I think is important, because parents, they see dollar signs in their eyes, and then they say, okay, I'm going to homeschool my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Homeschool your kids? What are you talking about? They're already out there by themselves all the time. Why the hell are you going to isolate them even more? So I totally disagree with that, but a lot of people do that. So now you get these sort of kids that aren't really, they're awkward and they haven't really sort of dealt with the real world, and they're sort of just don't know how to handle themselves. You can't expect them to do that.
Yeah, and those are the kind of kids that probably won't deal very well with fame eventually if they actually do make it as a tennis player.
They assume it will happen because they're told, and then at 18 they may have some that could all be over by 19, 20. I've advocated, and I think it's important now, because if you see tennis, especially in the men's side, but even the women's to a certain degree, they peak at a later years. You know, and it used to be 18 to 28. Now it's 22 to 32, say, and sometimes even a little longer. So why not have them experience college, grow as a human being? Oh, my God, do you want to do that? Be able to handle themselves.
Well, the John McEnroe Tennis Academy seems to be addressing some of your issues with the elitism of the sport, because if I have this right, you're actually reaching out to give underprivileged kids more of an opportunity to learn the sport and advance in it.
Yeah, that's my number one goal. I mean, I'm 5 minutes from Harlem. You know, it's got a history. Just as you say Harlem, you think of, well, there's a lot of things you think of, but there was also legendary times there, and tremendous, obviously, history in Harlem. As the Bronx, you know, it's mainly New York City. I mean, I grew up in Queens and Manhattan. But that's difficult. It's one thing to, and I'd raise as much money as I can, and I'm going to continue to try to do that. It's not easy. I mean, there's a lot of great causes out there, and people think, I wish I could give money so a guy can play tennis. I mean, a lot of what we've done is they won't be pro players, but even getting a scholarship at a Division I school changes their lives and saves, I think we all know that it's ridiculously expensive college. And people can't. Most people can't afford it. Forget the people that really can't afford it. And so that is certainly something that I'm trying to spend as much time as I can to sort of make people more aware. And I've gotten. I mean, we've done well, and we got people to contribute. But if you get a 10-year-old, well, guess what? That take 10 years later. Money, I wish I could tell you the 10 grand a year or even 20 would do the trick, but it doesn't.
Well, your own kids also play tennis, and in the book you include a college essay that your daughter Anna wrote on what it's like to play tennis and be a McEnroe. Now, as a famous tennis father, how do you strike the balance between being a pushy tennis dad and yet still being supportive?
Well, I'm not sure I did a tremendous job in a way. I tried to. I tried to be the best parent I can be. It's the toughest job in the world by far, and particularly with this. I would have support. I mean, I would support them either way, but if they showed that hunger and the desire and the will that's necessary, commitment to it, I would have encouraged it and allowed that and explained to them, do you know what you're going to get yourself into? Because obviously it's not going to just be how good is Kevin McEnroe. It's going to be what does he act like? Is his temper like his father's? That was my fault.
It's
my fault. It's my fault that they have to deal with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's probably partially my fault they have tempers. Yeah. But years ago, when my son Sean was playing in high school tennis, they were playing at a club I used to practice at, and Eli Nastasi was there, and he was on the first court. I think my son was all the way down the fifth court at the end, and he was making a big commotion, and he was like, "Hey, shut up, He called me Macaroni. He goes, "Shut up, Macaroni." He was kidding. He goes, "That's probably McEnroe's kid." Well, it turned out it was. So, yeah, that hurt. But nonetheless, it's been a sort of walking a tightrope, needless to say, which is why really my kids, in a way, never had that. They didn't. I mean, I don't blame them. I didn't really push them to do that. And I think that would have been extremely difficult because you don't see a lot of that in tennis. I mean, name a lot of successful pros that have had sons or daughters for them. And it's a very small list that have been able to succeed. So it's even more difficult when there's going to be all this attention paid upon them. So 4 of the 6 played high school tennis. One played college. Kevin played for a year. He said he didn't like his teammates. Forget it. Emily was, who's 26 now. She was arguably the best athlete of all my kids, and she chose to sort of not do it at all, really. Even though it was in a way too bad because she was the one that was most naturally chose to go into dancing for a while. Yeah,
well, I found in my family that tennis is great for a family. It's like, what do they say? The family that plays tennis together stays together. I was never very good, but we always enjoyed it. It was a great family activity. To this day, I have a problem with my serve. I mean, I look like a Muppet swatting at flies when I try to serve. Do you have any tips for me?
Well, the tip would be pick another sport. No,
that's probably good advice in my case.
The serving people take for granted because they look at John Isner and some. I mean, obviously, grow 6 inches would help. Sampras, these all-time great servers, it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, you go hit the ball 125 miles an hour. I mean, I wish I'd do that once in my life. So serving is a tricky thing, but it's like pitching. Yeah. If you're natural with like a pitch, there's certain things, there's similarities, and a lot of times people don't use all their body. So that would be like aware of use your legs, use your core. And I got a tip from my coach that was great. It was, if you ever hit your serve in the net, that means you're pulling your head down too quickly. And if you hit it too far, that means the ball's dropping too quickly. So these are like the most basic things that 98% of people don't listen to. Yeah. So you would greatly improve your serve if you just were aware of that.
All right, I'm going to give that a shot. Yeah. Well, before we go, this episode airs July 3rd, the opening day of Wimbledon. Who do you favor going into it?
I would favor... I think Federer's going to be the favorite. I think there's about a half dozen guys that could win it. And it sort of depends, because I haven't seen the draw yet, how that plays out in the next week. Murray's going to have an ability to have something to say because he hasn't done much. And Djokovic is sort of semi-panicking because he's fallen off the map the last year compared to what he was doing. So there's a lot of reasons. And then there's hopefully some of these hungry guys like, the guy I was working with, Milos Raonic, who got to the finals last year. And someone that come out of the blue a little bit, God forbid. Someone that you go, okay, it's time for Grigor Dimitrov to finally step up once and for all instead of sort of falling over when these guys sort of breathe on him. Yeah.
Certainly make it more interesting. How about for women's?
Women, to me, is very wide open because Serena's not there, and it's certainly unpredictable. I don't follow the ins and outs like this girl, Ostapenko, won the French. I don't recall ever seeing her play. I was amazed at the way she played, that she got away. I mean, talk about swinging for the fences. It wouldn't be the way I would coach someone. And I was watching, and she was down 6-4, 3-love, about to go down 4-love to like a steady person who was 3 in the world, who had more experience, who had been in the finals, Halep. And I thought, this is over. It's going to be over. But then she sort of turned it around and won a couple of games. And I'm like, this could work. Yeah. It's totally anti what I would sort of advocate. 64 winners, 71 unforced errors, some incredible number. But it definitely gets the other person uneasy. So the key to winning, I would say, there's more than one way to do it.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out the way that unsettles your opponent the most, whatever way that is, that comes most naturally to you.
Yeah.
And so for women and guys, for that matter, it's difficult to say because there's not a lot of people these days are that comfortable playing on grass. It's
Right.
a different surface. They only play about a month a year on grass. So that's and arguably our biggest event is played on it's 2 or 3 events leading up to it and Wimbledon. So it's 5 weeks. They've added an extra week finally. So it's 5 weeks for the guys to get to the end and the girls. And that's not a lot of time to sort of figure out a bit of the nuances. So they end up sort of playing the same way. So if anyone could figure out a couple sort of moves that the low slice that is a no-brainer, they're going to do something potentially.
Yeah. You have no shortage of opinions. Real quick, what's one thing you would do away with?
One thing in tennis, you mean?
Yeah. Take it however you want.
One thing I would do away with in tennis would be the linesman. I think that if you had to pick,
that's not surprising, I suppose.
It's the least likely thing that will happen. Mm-hmm. The other thing, I mean, I could name 5 things, but I think that they play for so long that I don't see why there's not a tiebreaker in the 5th set or the 3rd set of a women's or 5th set of a man's because people's attention span is so much less. And I would eliminate lets on serve because I just think that's one less thing to worry about. And I like a little unpredictability. It's as a commentator, as a player, the top guys, I could see where they wouldn't want that because that sort of levels the playing field.
Well, again, the book is called But Seriously. John McEnroe, thanks for talking with me.
Thanks for putting up with me.
Anytime. Thanks again to John McEnroe for coming on the podcast. Order his book, But Seriously, on Amazon, or download the audio version for free with a special promotion just for our listeners at audibletrial.com/kickassnews. Look for John McEnroe broadcasting live from Wimbledon on ESPN or the BBC, and learn more about the John McEnroe Tennis Academy at sporttimeny.com. Be sure to subscribe to Kick-Ass News on iTunes and leave us a review while you're there. Don't forget to take our listener survey. It only takes 5 minutes at podsurvey.com/kick. You can visit Kick-Ass News on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod. And be sure to recommend Kick-Ass News to your friends on your social media. And if you really want to help out, then donate to our GoFundMe campaign at gofundme.com/kickassnews, or click on the donate button at kickassnews.com. As always, I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. For now, though, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kick-Ass News. Kick-Ass News is a trademark of Mathis Entertainment, Inc.